Ethan had never felt more uncertain in his life. Standing at the edge of the observation deck, he watched the pale green earth below, a swirling marble of clouds and seas, and tried to imagine what kind of father his daughter, Myra, really needed. Lyra, his alien wife, had said it with quiet firmness earlier that morning. She needs her real father. The words had echoed in his mind ever since, filling every corner with a cold, strange weight. He didn't understand at first. He had loved Myra from the day she was born, had changed her diapers, taught her to walk, to talk, and to smile. He had been there for her laughter, her tears, and her tiny triumphs. Yet somehow, his human presence was not enough. The journey to Mars was daunting, but Ethan had always been good with machines. In the small engineering bay of their colony, he inspected his shuttle with meticulous care. Every panel, every wire, every fuel conduit had to be perfect. Humans were few in the interplanetary colonies, and mistakes could be costly. His hands, usually steady and confident, trembled slightly as he ran the final diagnostics. He wasn't leaving for adventure. He was leaving for something far more fragile and terrifying: hope. Lyra had prepared him the night before. She spoke softly, her voice almost melodic. Mars is not just another planet, it has its own rules. Myra's father, her real father, is part of that world. He will teach her things I cannot. Ethan had nodded, swallowing hard. He wanted to argue, to insist that he had been enough, but he knew it was useless. Lyra's eyes held a certainty that was unshakable, and somewhere inside him, he feared she was right. The shuttle hummed as it powered up, a small, comforting vibration beneath his feet. Ethan fastened his seatbelt and checked the controls one last time. He whispered Myra's name, a small prayer that reached out across space, and then lifted off. The blue and green of Earth shrank rapidly beneath him, replaced by the endless, dark stretch of space dotted with stars. The journey was long but not lonely. Ethan had packed books, old recordings of Myra's laughter, and a tiny garden of plants he had grown himself. Each day he spent time with the plants, tending them carefully, talking to them as if they could listen. In a strange way, it reminded him of Myra. Life needed care, attention, and patience. And perhaps, just perhaps, so did relationships. Days passed, and Mars grew larger in the viewport. Its rusty red surface looked harsh and unwelcoming, yet Ethan could see beauty in the sweeping plains and towering cliffs. He had read about Martian settlements, about the complex networks of habitats where humans and aliens had begun to coexist. But he knew he would be a stranger there, a human out of place, trying to find a place in a world that was not his own. When the shuttle finally touched down on Mars, the thin atmosphere hissed around the hull. Ethan stepped out in his pressurized suit, the ground crunching softly beneath his boots. The settlements were unlike anything he had imagined. Transparent domes clustered together like a colony of glass mushrooms, and bridges of light connected them in patterns that seemed almost artistic. People or beings moved about, some humanoid, others more alien, with elegant limbs and strange gestures that were unfamiliar yet mesmerizing. Ethan's heart raced. He was here, on another planet, looking for someone who may not even exist in the way he had imagined. His first encounters were cautious. Martians were polite but distant, their language melodic and fast. Ethan had studied some of it during his flight, but speaking was another matter entirely. Still, he persisted, using gestures, pictures, and the few words he knew. He hoped Myra would understand if he could at least communicate his intentions clearly. The real challenge came when Ethan reached the inner circle of the colony, where Lyra's so-called real father might be. He asked around, but the answers were always vague. "He will appear when the time is right," one Martian elder said. "She must find him within herself," another whispered. Ethan felt a pang of frustration. He had traveled millions of kilometers and was met with riddles instead of answers, but he reminded himself why he had come. He had come for Myra. One evening, as the two sons of Mars set, casting long, golden shadows over the red plains, Ethan sat outside his small quarters. He looked up at the alien sky, at the twin suns slowly dipping below the horizon, and thought about Myra's laugh, her tiny hands wrapped around his fingers. He realized that perhaps this journey was not only about finding a real father, but understanding what it truly meant to be one. The next morning, he began to explore the Martian habitats in earnest. He observed their ways, how they cultivated food, how they shared resources, and how children were taught to grow with respect for both tradition and innovation. There was a rhythm to their lives, a balance between independence and community that was both foreign and inspiring. Ethan noted every detail, recording them, trying to understand the world his daughter was a part of. During one of his walks, Ethan stumbled upon a problem the Martians had not solved. A water circulation unit was malfunctioning, threatening to dry out a small community garden. Humans were not supposed to meddle, but Ethan's curiosity and instinct took over. He examined the system, traced the pipes, and devised a simple rerouting using materials he found nearby. Within hours, the water flowed again. The Martians watched, astonished. "You fixed it differently," one elder said. "You're thinking, human, yes," Ethan smiled. He didn't fully understand all the subtleties of their culture, but he realized that perhaps being human wasn't a weakness here. It could be a strength. And maybe, just maybe, that strength was something Myra needed to see in him. But even as he gained respect, Ethan felt the weight of the journey pressing down on him. He still did not know where Myra's real father was, or if he even existed. Each day without clarity added a silent pressure in his chest. Yet he pressed on, exploring, learning, and quietly hoping that somewhere along the Red Plains, he would find the key to proving that he could be the father Myra deserved, not by tradition, not by blood, but by love, determination, and human ingenuity. Ethan woke to the soft, orange glow of the Martian sunrise, spilling through the domed windows of his temporary quarters. Each morning, Mars seemed different, its surface alive with shifting shadows, subtle changes in terrain, and the quiet hum of machinery and life. Today, he told himself, he would get closer to understanding what Myra's real father meant and how he could prove himself worthy in her eyes. He stepped out, inhaling through his suit's filtration system, and made his way toward the central marketplace of the settlement. The air was crisp with the faint smell of hydroponic gardens and freshly recycled oxygen. Martians moved gracefully through the domes, their long limbs bending elegantly with every step. They spoke in soft, melodic phrases, accompanied by gestures that seemed almost like dancing. Ethan watched, fascinated and slightly intimidated as they interacted. He wanted to join them, to show that humans could belong here, too. His first challenge came almost immediately. A group of young Martians was struggling to adjust a solar collector that powered part of the settlement's energy grid. The problem was small but delicate. If misaligned, the collectors would fail to store enough energy for the night cycle. Humans were not supposed to intervene in Martian affairs, especially not in tasks deemed symbolic or educational. But Ethan could not watch the children struggle. He approached cautiously. "Excuse me," he said, trying a few words he had learned from his translation device. The Martians turned, their eyes wide but not hostile. Using hand gestures and simple schematics he had drawn, Ethan explained how to adjust the panels more efficiently. The children followed his instructions, their movements hesitant at first but gradually confident. By midday, the solar collectors were perfectly aligned, humming quietly as they stored energy. The Martians were quiet for a moment, then one elder approached. "You think differently," she said in halting words. Human thought unexpected, useful. Ethan nodded, a smile spreading across his face. For the first time since arriving, he felt that his human ingenuity mattered here. Over the next few days, Ethan immersed himself in Martian culture. He learned how they cultivated food using minimal water, how they educated children with games of memory, creativity, and collaboration, and how each Martian community shared resources without the need for strict rules or enforcement. It was a world both foreign and inspiring, structured yet flexible, and it forced Ethan to reflect on what he valued as a parent. One evening, while tending to a small water garden he had adopted near his quarters, Ethan overheard a conversation between two Martian scholars. They spoke of the concept of a real father in their culture, not a literal parent, but a mentor or guide who helped the child find their identity, strengths, and place in the community. Ethan's heart sank and lifted at the same time. Myra's real father was not a person to find. It was a role, a responsibility, a symbol. He had been trying to chase a phantom, but maybe he could embody the meaning instead. Ethan's days became a mixture of observation, learning, and small acts of helpfulness. He assisted in repairing machinery, shared ideas for better water circulation, and offered solutions to challenges that the Martians had not solved due to their cultural constraints. Each time, the Martians watched him with a mixture of curiosity and growing respect. They did not understand his humanity entirely, but they began to recognize its value. Yet despite these successes, Ethan felt the quiet ache of isolation. He missed Myra. He missed Lyra's calm presence. He sent messages through the colony communication networks, but delays were long and responses minimal. The thought of losing precious time with his daughter weighed heavily on him. He reminded himself constantly, he was here to learn, to prove, and to reconnect. Failure was not an option. One day, Ethan was approached by a Martian child, no older than Myra, who held a small, intricate puzzle in her hands. She tilted her head and offered it to him. "Help," she asked in soft, broken English, a gift of trust and curiosity. Ethan took it, examining the delicate structure. It was a challenge of logic and creativity, a test of patience and observation. As he worked through it, adjusting pieces, testing patterns, and watching the child's eyes light up with every small success, he realized something profound. This moment, simple as it was, reflected the very essence of parenting: guidance, patience, and encouragement. By helping this child, Ethan began to understand the role he could play for Myra. Being her real father did not mean competing with an alien figure. It meant being present, thoughtful, and inventive, teaching her to navigate challenges and celebrate discovery. He smiled quietly to himself, the weight in his chest easing slightly. Weeks passed, and Ethan became more integrated into Martian life. He learned their rhythms and adapted his habits. The humans' tendency to improvise and innovate became his strength, bridging cultural gaps that the Martians had long accepted as unchangeable. In small ways, he reshaped the community's perspective on humans, not as outsiders but as collaborators. But then, one afternoon, disaster struck in an unexpected way. A solar flare disrupted communications across the colony. Messages from Earth, including those from Lyra, were blocked. Ethan tried every system, every connection, but the isolation was complete. For the first time, the distance between him and his daughter felt insurmountable. Panic and doubt crept in. He had worked so hard, yet he could not reach the one person he had come to protect. Determined not to surrender to fear, Ethan focused on what he could control. He analyzed the settlement's energy systems, studied Martian messaging arrays, and began designing a makeshift transmitter capable of sending direct voice messages across the disrupted channels. The Martians watched with cautious interest, unsure if human methods would succeed. Ethan stayed up night after night, adjusting circuits, rerouting power, and testing frequencies. The work was exhausting, but it was driven by love, the kind that gave him strength when all else failed. At last, after many attempts, the device worked. His voice reached Myra, faint and distorted but unmistakable. "Myra," he said, his words trembling with emotion, "it's Daddy. I'm here. I won't ever leave." Across the void of space, she responded with a giggle, a small word of recognition that filled him with joy and relief. The Martians around him, who had never fully understood human attachment, observed in silent fascination. They could see the power of determination, patience, and love, the traits that defined Ethan's humanity. That night, Ethan reflected on the journey. He had traveled millions of kilometers, faced isolation, and confronted misunderstanding. But he had also learned, grown, and proved something vital. Being a parent, being a mentor, being a real father was not about biology or tradition. It was about presence, creativity, empathy, and persistence. He understood that Myra would not just remember the distances he crossed, but the lessons, patience, and joy he shared with her. Ethan also recognized that Mars itself had changed him. Its landscapes, its culture, its people, and its challenges had tested him in ways Earth never could. He had adapted, innovated, and connected, proving to himself and to the Martians that humanity had a unique and valuable place in the universe. And as he watched the twin suns dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, he felt a renewed determination. The journey was far from over. There were still lessons to teach, bridges to build, and the final steps to truly connect with Myra. With hope, patience, and the tools of his human ingenuity, Ethan prepared for the next stage of his journey. Mars had taught him that the heart's work was never easy, but it was always worth it. The path ahead promised new discoveries, unexpected challenges, and opportunities to shine, not with weapons or strength, but with intelligence, love, and unwavering resolve. And somewhere in the red dust, the seed of understanding between father and daughter, human and alien, had already begun to grow. Ethan woke to the soft, pink glow of the Martian morning, the twin suns rising slowly over the red plains. He had spent weeks learning, helping, and discovering on this alien world, but today felt different. Today, he sensed that the culmination of his journey, the moment he truly connected with Myra, was approaching. He dressed quickly and stepped out of his quarters, the crunch of Martian soil beneath his boots grounding him. The settlement was alive with its usual rhythm. Martians moved through the domes, their elegant gestures and soft melodies filling the air. Ethan smiled to himself. He had grown fond of this world and its people. They were patient teachers, careful observers, and curious learners. And yet, he knew that the greatest lesson was still ahead, the one that no Martian could teach, the one only a human father could give. He made his way to the makeshift communication device he had built. It was a strange contraption, a blend of human engineering and Martian technology, wires and circuits intertwined with alien crystals that amplified signals. It had taken him days to perfect, but finally it could transmit not just sound but patterns of thought, emotions, and subtle nuances. Ethan had learned that connection was more than words. It was presence, even across vast distances. As he activated the device, a small figure appeared on the other end, Myra. She had grown since he last saw her eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. Her alien heritage shone through in the subtle shape of her ears and the slight shimmer of her skin under Earth light, yet she was unmistakably his daughter. Ethan felt a surge of emotion he could barely contain. "Myra," he said, his voice trembling with joy, "it's Daddy. I'm here, I've come for you." Myra's eyes widened, and for a moment she was silent. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. She reached out, pressing her small hand against the screen as if trying to touch him. Ethan's heart soared. This was the connection he had traveled millions of kilometers to achieve. It was real, tangible, and full of warmth. Over the next days, Ethan spent every moment teaching Myra through the device. He guided her in simple human skills, showing her how to observe patterns, solve problems, and think creatively. He shared stories of Earth, of forests, oceans, and animals she had never seen. Myra laughed, asked questions, and tried to mimic his gestures. It was a small miracle, a bridge between planets, species, and cultures. Yet Ethan knew that communication through a device was not enough. He wanted to hold her, to be with her in person. But Mars was not home and Earth was far. Still, he continued, confident that the lessons he shared, the time they spent together, even across distance, was shaping Myra into a thoughtful, clever, and curious child. One evening, as the twin suns set in a blaze of orange and violet, Ethan walked through the Martian gardens. The air was calm, filled with the scent of alien flora and the hum of energy flowing through the settlement. Martians passed him by, nodding in respect, acknowledging the human who had brought new ideas, solutions, and a touch of warmth to their community. Ethan reflected on how far he had come. He had arrived as a stranger, uncertain and anxious, and had become someone whose presence mattered. He paused near a small fountain, its water sparkling despite the thin atmosphere. He thought about the concept of Myra's real father. It had once seemed like an impossible standard, a figure of legend he could never compete with, but now he understood. The real father was not someone to chase, it was a role to embrace. It was patience, love, teaching, listening, and supporting. Ethan realized that he had been that father all along. He had only needed to see it for himself. The following morning brought unexpected news. A delegation from Lyra's home colony had arrived on Mars, seeking to understand Ethan's contributions to the settlement. They were curious, cautious, and full of questions. Ethan welcomed them, showing them the gardens, the communication device, and the small solutions he had developed. The delegation watched as Myra's laughter echoed through the device, her eyes sparkling with understanding and joy. One elder spoke carefully, choosing words with weight. "You have shown what it means to be a guide, a teacher, a father, not through lineage but through action and care. Your heart and mind have bridged worlds. This is the gift of humanity." Ethan bowed his head, humbled but proud. He had traveled far, faced isolation and doubt, and had proven not only to himself but to another species that humans had value in the universe, not through strength, but through creativity, empathy, and determination. The next challenge was simpler yet profound. Ethan had to convince Myra that he was indeed her father in the truest sense. Using the communication device, he told stories of their shared moments, of her first steps, her first laugh, the bedtime stories Lyra had helped him tell. He guided her through puzzles and games, teaching her how to think, imagine, and solve problems. Slowly, Myra began to recognize him not just as a voice on a screen, but as the center of her world, the person who loved her unconditionally. One afternoon, a Martian child approached Ethan, holding a small, woven gift. "For you," the child said, smiling shyly. Ethan accepted it and examined it carefully. The design was intricate, full of interlocking patterns that mirrored the structure of the Martian city itself. He realized that it was a symbol, an acknowledgement of trust and connection. Myra had given him the same kind of gift, her heart, her attention, and her willingness to learn from him. By the end of the third week, Ethan felt a quiet triumph. He had crossed impossible distances, navigated alien culture, solved real problems, and built bridges of understanding that no one had thought possible. He had proven himself to Myra, to the Martians, and to himself. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: being human was enough. Human ingenuity, patience, empathy, and love were not weaknesses, they were strengths. They could solve problems, create beauty, and forge connections that span planets. Mars had taught him that humanity's greatest power was not in domination or aggression, but in care, creativity, and determination. The final day of Part 3 arrived with calm skies and quiet air. Ethan stood with Myra, her small hand in his, looking out over the Martian plains. The twin suns cast long shadows, painting the landscape in gold and crimson. Myra turned to him, eyes bright with understanding. "Daddy," she said softly, "you're my real father." Ethan's chest swelled with emotion. He knelt, holding her close through the layers of their communication suit, feeling the connection that distance could not diminish. Lyra arrived soon after, her alien features soft with pride and relief. She smiled at Ethan, the unspoken acknowledgement passing between them that the journey, the doubts, and the efforts had not been in vain. Myra laughed, a pure sound of joy, and ran to play with the Martian children nearby, using the lessons she had learned from both her worlds. Ethan watched, heart full, and knew that his role as a father was secure. He had not just traveled to Mars. He had transcended doubt, distance, and culture to prove that love and ingenuity could connect hearts across worlds. The Martians had learned from him, Myra had learned from him, and he had discovered something profound about himself. Humanity had a place in the universe, not through fear or power, but through creativity, empathy, and the courage to care. As the twin suns set one final time, Ethan smiled. Mars was no longer alien. It was a place of growth, understanding, and triumph. He had crossed millions of kilometers, faced the unknown, and found the truth of fatherhood in its purest form. Myra's laughter echoed through the settlement, a reminder that even across space and species, human love could shine brightly. Ethan knew that more adventures awaited, more lessons to teach and learn. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing that he had succeeded in the most important journey of all, to be the father his daughter needed, not by tradition or blood, but through patience, ingenuity, and unwavering love.